Hello and welcome to the Business Programme with me, Charlotte Lomas-Farley. Carbon trading was one of the key elements of the Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Analysts say Russia offers tremendous potential for carbon trading as it ran up a huge carbon deficit at the beginning of the decade when industrial production was low. Joining me now to discuss how the system is supposed to work and where the money is Michael Wilkins, the head of carbon markets at Standard & Poor's. Thank you very much for joining us. So first of all, could you just explain how does carbon trading work?
Well, essentially carbon trading is when one country trades carbon reductions with another one. So if you reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that you put into the atmosphere, you can sell that reduction to another country for a profit. And it's the same as any other commodity in that respect. The only big difference is that it's very strictly regulated under the Kyoto Protocol by the United Nations. So it is essentially a commodity market. It's worth around $144 billion a year in terms of global allowance trading, and most of the activity is in the European emissions trading scheme. But other countries are increasingly selling credits into the trading scheme, including Russia.
So is it possible to make money from it?
There is a possibility to make money. Essentially, if you reduce the amount of carbon you put into the atmosphere and you invest money to do so, then you earn a carbon credit. That carbon credit can then be sold at a profit into an emissions trading scheme. So it is possible to make money out of it.
Now, you're here in Moscow for a conference in the Carbon Markets and Investors Association. Now, what potential does Russia offer for carbon trading?
Well, Russia at the moment is embarked on a major milestone in terms of its carbon trading activity. It's just approved the first 15 emission reduction projects under the JI scheme, which stands for Joint Implementation. Those 15 projects account for somewhere in the region of 37 million tonnes of carbon reductions, and they are going to be sold into the international market. Now, while that's not a huge amount of carbon reduction, we're talking about 370 million euros in terms of the value, compared to 144 billion overall globally, it's still an important start for Russia. We've been waiting for 4 years to get to this stage. And more importantly, Russia is now going to carry on tendering out more and more projects under JI. And the estimated value of the market for Russia is somewhere in the region of 2.7 billion euros on the assumption that it generates 100 million tonnes of carbon reduction per year.
Oh, right, so a lot at stake there for
Exactly.
Russia. So what rules does the country need to adopt then to take advantage of its emission reductions?
Well, Russia's made a good start by adopting legislation and new rules for the trading of emission reduction credits under JI. And we're now starting to see that go through the process of approval. But really what Russia needs to do, if we're going to get to the stage of wide-scale trading, is adopt an emissions trading scheme like we've seen in Europe. That will allow caps to be put on companies, big polluting companies like coal fire stations and cement producers, and that will allow those companies to actually earn money from the allowances. There will be a trading system, and then they can also buy and generate offsets. Again, that will be a multifunctional system like we see in the EU.
Now, Russia is the world's fourth largest emitter of carbon dioxide. Now, how does that compare to other nations, especially in its efforts to try and reduce those emissions?
Well, up to recently, Russia has done precious little to reduce its carbon emissions because Russia has a huge amount of resources in fossil fuels. It hasn't really seen the need to reduce its energy efficiency because energy is essentially very cheap in Russia. But now we're starting to see a change in political atmosphere, excuse the pun, because the fires which happened during the summer showed that climate change and the impact of climate change can be quite devastating. And that's led to a political movement in favour of emissions reduction. So it can actually implement quite a lot of measures to reduce. So far, most of those have been centred on the oil and gas sector, but we expect to see more coming involved in terms of energy efficiency and, most importantly, renewable energy. Up to now, renewables have not been a feature of the Russian landscape, whereas in other developing countries and emerging markets, they're a big feature. So that could be a massive change.
Great. Well, Michael Wilkins, the head of global markets at Standard & Poor's, thank you very much for speaking with us this hour.